There we go. We're live today. It's Friday, the 29th of May, not June, as I falsely advertised it this morning. I don't know whether I'm coming or going. We're here at Lockdown Children's Lit Fest. I'm Catherine Miller, and I'm here today with the wonderful Julia Eccleshare. Hi, Julia.
Hi there. Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate this. So I've been teaching for about 20 years, and I'm now going into schools, helping them motivate children to read, because reading for pleasure is the key indicator in helping children to achieve and learn and be human. So I'm really honoured that you've been able to join us today. Would you like to start off with telling us about your... Sorry, I've got an echo. Have you got an echo there?
No, it's all right.
Okay, well, it must just be my hearing. Sorry, would you like to tell us your memories as a reader, as a child? What were your early memories?
Well, gosh, I suppose the main thing about me was that I was a very, very slow to learn reader, and I would nowadays have been called dyslexic. And I come from a family where a great many people are, and there's much more known about it. But at the time, I just do remember learning to read was a huge struggle. I didn't learn, I'm not one of those people who hoovered up books. I was the third of 4 children. I had a lot of story around me. I was very lucky. I had a lot of being read to. And I listened to, if you're the third of 4, you hear a lot of other people's stories as well as your own. My mother was a teacher. My father was a publisher. I came from a very booky background. So that set the scene. So reading was just sort of one of the things you did. I mean, it wasn't sort of a big deal, except that I couldn't actually do it, which is why, of course, I remember very clearly the book that made me a reader, which was a book of no great shakes, I can tell you. But it's funny how you remember that moment that you transformed from being somebody for whom this was a real struggle and you were never where you should be on the Janis and Johns or whatever. And that was the book that did it for me. And when I mentioned this at a conference once and said what it was called, a teacher very sweetly went and got me a copy of it. And it was wonderful to see it again. It just took me back immediately to everything I remembered about that transforming moment. But having said that,
what was it?
It was called The 5.5 Club. And it is no great merit, but it's got, it's huge in my mind.
Yes.
I mean, very interesting, and it's wonderful to be thinking about children's books always, but particularly as very recently, in the last few weeks, I think it is, my sense of time is a bit short, the wonderful, wonderful Margaret Mead Spencer died. And there's a wonderful obituary in The Guardian of her yesterday, online yesterday, I don't think it's in print yet. And she was such a guru to me when I first started work. I inherited her as a reviewer when I started work, and everything she says about the transforming power of reading and everything she says about what the reader brings to the book is it's something we should never, ever forget. And she believed very strongly that, reading aloud is the key to it. And as I say, I think being brought up in a home where the expectation, we had, and this was, I came from a very middle class literary world, and it was totally normal to go to my best friend's house and her father read Dickens aloud at lunch. And my uncle always read to us on holiday. We used to go on holiday in Scotland where there wasn't any electricity. I mean, there is in Scotland, but there wasn't in this place. And he read aloud every evening. That's where I got introduced to Kipling and C.S. Forester and all sorts of people. And if you're brought up in a world in which what is in books is shared regularly, there isn't a kind of, even though I couldn't do the actual reading of them, I don't think I ever felt excluded from what books offered. And of course, because we were talking about a long time ago, we went to the library every week and we had our cards and we collected books and we swapped them. And the library had, wonderful books by people like René Guillot, French writer, who I think she's French-Canadian, who wrote animal stories. We had things like Paul Bernard's 100 Million Francs. We were brought up on it. International literature for children was fairly commonplace. And for me, the thing that sparked my imagination was historical fiction. And so I was an absolute passionate Rosemary Sutcliffe reader. I don't think I understood that I find interesting is how little you understand as a reader when you're a child. And how, even as an adult, how little you understand as a reader, but how as a child, I mean, my favourite book, if I have to say what my favourite book is, I would always say Warrior Scarlet by Rosemary Sutcliffe. Now, this is a book about a boy in the Yarn Age who has a withered arm. So actually it was a disability book, but, you know, we didn't call it that. And it's about overcoming adversity and finding out where you belonged and testing yourself. But, you know, when I read it again, sort of as an adult, it's only then you realise, oh my gosh, that's what that story was really about.
Yes. Children are very good at taking a book at face value, aren't they, and ignoring the issues that we pin on.
The first thing that you read it for is what is happening in the story. And then it's only much later, and this is why I'm such a fan of rereading, it's only afterwards that you begin to realise that what is happening in the story is fuelled by something much more important than the adventure that is ostensibly the thing that you're following. Mm-hmm. So yes, I mean, I was a hopeless reader. I am an appalling speller, as you know, which surprises people because they think if you can read, you can spell. I would have been a disaster in the current teaching of reading. I would have been failing from 5, you know. It just wasn't the way I did it. And mm-hmm. As I say, I think, I mean, you know, I suppose it's given me the absolute confidence to know that a child who is brought up in a world where what is in a book is shared is almost a reader. It doesn't really matter whether they can manage the print. It does matter, of course, later on. But
they see themselves as a reader.
Exactly. They see them. There is no, you're not a reader. You are a reader because you're getting what's in the story. And I think that's, you know, that is, for me, I think I would take away the teaching of reading in infants and just immerse children in story.
Yes.
Is in story. And the other thing about it is it's not that then affects you as a reader. It actually affects everything in your whole life.
Absolutely.
Because everything is predicated on what is in stories. And sometimes they come from written sources, sometimes they come from oral sources. It doesn't really matter. But that is how we know what happened before. Because yes. It's old, you know, and we are only able to move on if we know what's happened before and we know how to make use of it. So I think I think we so minimize isn't quite the word about reading, because I mean everyone knows you have to be a reader, but people think it's all about functionality, but it's actually about something much more profound than that. Well, it is about functionality, but it's about functioning as a person, not about functioning just reading print.
Yes, so, it's not just the skill, it's about what you get from the actual physical act of doing it.
Exactly. And of course, you know, I was also lucky because living where we did, and because my father was a publisher, probably we did know quite a lot of children's writers. So I kind of always knew it was something that people did. It seemed very alive. It didn't seem peculiar and rarefied. We didn't mind about the, you know, now, of course, when I look back on it, I'm slightly appalled at what the fare was. And I look at the Carnegie winners of those years and I'm quite shocked. But then that's nice, because that means that now I feel very excited about, you know, the way that we're making changes for that. And I think it is, you know, of course, we're not diverse enough or any of those things, but at least we have a literature for children which is accessible for everybody. And quite frankly, when I was growing up, that's why I would never call, I mean, you know, I would never have called it a golden age. I don't like golden ages, but it had some wonderful books for kind of white middle-class boys, really. And I was a white middle-class grammar school boys, and I was a white middle-class grammar school educated girl, but same almost. And so what's good is to feel happy with what I had, but happier with how I think we're moving in children's literature, because I think we are now aware that this is something that absolutely everybody needs to have.
Absolutely. And I think that we are moving. I know that you touched on the way reading's taught. I think we are moving away in a more positive direction with the changes to the Ofsted framework and so on, that Reading for Pleasure does have an actual presence in the primary school now. But hopefully, you know, the generation of teachers who were raised on you must learn to decode and phonics are getting that message as well.
I think so. I think it's all been broadened out. Mm-hmm. The other thing that happened to me in children's books, which is sort of was almost more, no, it wasn't more profound. Obviously, how you become a reader is the most profound. But the second thing that happened to me was when my children were at primary school, and I was very lucky. They were at a primary school doing the now much reviled child-centered learning. And this was in the halcyon days of the ILEA. And there wasn't a single reading scheme in the school. I didn't know about reading schemes. I mean, that sounds a ridiculous thing to say. I'd started my professional life. I was working in children's books. I did not know what a reading scheme was because they didn't have them.
Well, that seems kind of bambooling. That just
they learned to read on Mr. Magnolia has only one boot. He had an old trumpet that went rooty toot. And, you know, so I thought there was a whole, I think there is still a whole tranche of children's literature that I don't know anything about. But I think it's interesting that I work in a field that has in a way I've been very lucky. It's never been sullied by anything. Because of course I learned school to read on Janet and John, but that was what school did. That wasn't what home did, and home was more important. And then it was replicated in a funny kind of way with my children because they never had to read Roger Redhat, anything else like that. And it was before the Oxford Reading Tree. Yeah. So I've been incredibly lucky to see children's books always as being this really incredibly fertile field and just full of opportunity.
So given that there is such an amazing spread of publishing at the moment, I mean, I know that you've quoted how you'll be able to tell me how many books are published every year. It's a phenomenal number. How do you find that when you are involved in judging these wonderful prizes? How do you narrow down the selection for these? The shortlist for the prizes are all phenomenal quality. If anyone's looking for books, shortlist for prizes are a great place to go to. So how do you narrow it down?
Well, you have your judges. I mean, that's the main thing. It's people's opinion, and that's the great thing. Well, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, I remember when I was asked to do this 1001 children's books to read before you grow up, you start thinking about books, and there are lots of books that I thought just I liked. I somehow thought they'd come into my life and they were important to me. When you get advice, because obviously with a book like that, you have advisors from across the world, and you find, oh my God, that's a very famous book. You know, you don't always think like that. And it's just the same with judging. I mean, I've judged prizes and disagreed with everybody. I've judged prizes and agreed with everybody. I've had the extraordinary privilege of watch people's careers be pinged into action, J.K. Rowling particularly, by prizes. What is it you're looking for? I mean, interestingly, I think the thing that becomes terribly clear is that there are whole fields of reading that the response to a book is incredibly personal.
Yes.
You can't get away from that. And I know, I mean, I suppose as I'm older and wiser and have read more, I do know there are some things I'm really hopeless at. So I try to not in any way dominate any conversation that's about literature areas that I'm not very keen on. I mean, I'm not a great fantasy reader, but then when I read, you know, I absolutely loved His Dark Materials, Volume 1. But you see, interestingly, do you know what I thought it was? I thought it was an historical novel. And I read all that stuff in Jordan College as being like Gillian Avery writing about Victoria and Oxford, because that was my starting point. Because you never come to a book without, if you're a reader, you never come to a book without some prior knowledge of stories and the influences and all of that. So, I mean, but, you know, I think in prizes, sometimes, I remember when The Curious Incident of the Dog and the Night Time won the Guardian Children's Book Prize. And now that was a book that you could hate it. Obviously, there are going to be some people who've never got it, but it was so different. It was so special. And sometimes you're very lucky when you're judging a prize and you have something that's written like that, that's completely different. And you think, oh my gosh, I've never read this before. Mostly, of course, that isn't the case. You read things that you think, I've read something like this, but this version of it is either got amazing characters or there's something about the quality of the writing. And I expect, because my background was in kind of very literary fiction, I still don't mind if something is difficult to read. I know not a common view. And interestingly, in judging meetings, we often have this thing about, you know, something being very accessible or having relatability or being readable. I'm quite kind of stern on that. I think it's sometimes quite patronizing to children to think that they will like something because it's got kind of child appeal. And maybe they will like something that's quite challenging for them. Because
absolutely,
you know, and children, again, I think this increasingly, children, the world to children is pretty opaque. I mean, you know, they never know anything, really. They know what they're allowed to know about reality, and they know what they can understand in fiction. And there will be bits that they don't completely understand, but that doesn't really worry me. And I think challenging writing, again, I mean, that's an interesting thing. And I remember when my children were learning to read with this extraordinary, you know, anything goes approach, you couldn't predict what was going to be a difficult word. I mean, why can they read elephant but not read the, you know? And the same with reading a whole book. I think you can't always tell what a child is going to find a challenge.
Absolutely, yes, yeah, absolutely.
So but very, very ambitious for children.
And I think that sometimes adults forget that children have similar reading desires to adults, and that they will quite often read difficult texts and then go to a book that is too easy for them because they want to just have a relax or a bit of comfort read, or
they need to sort of synthesize what they've just read, which may have been kind of confusing, by reassuring them that actually reading can also feel very safe. I mean, a range of emotions from a book, and you know to be being, you know, having read Wolf, you know, when I read Wolf Hall, I didn't immediately want to go and read something else like that. I probably read something kind of very easy, and I think we should expect that. But I think with the judging prizes, it's what's really weird is you start off with, you know, however many it may be, so it depends on the prize, but I mean, you know, you start with a whole lot of books and you sort of think, crikey, there isn't anything here I think is really absolutely wonderful. And then when you narrow it down, you always find it really, well, not always, but you often find it really hard to find a winner because there's actually so much quality. But sometimes, and I think this is a problem because, as you say, there are kind of 10,000 children's books published a year, I do think we have a huge problem about people finding what is good. The navigation of it remains very, very tricky.
It is.
You know, if you ask me what the problem at the moment is, what breaks my heart is seeing authors whose books, you know, never somehow quite get noticed,
even though they're very good. And that's why your website, Love Reading for Kids, I know you collaborate with a lot of wonderful editors in there. It is an absolutely fantastic resource. How did that come about?
It was set up by two people who realized that there needed to be much more curation. I mean, I think, you know, I get very I don't like a kind of happy clappy approach to children's books. I don't think everything about children's books is wonderful. I think they do need careful curation. I think that can come from all sorts of angles. I don't think, you know, any one is better than anybody else, but I think we do have to sort of think about what we're offering children and help them navigate it, because they need, we all with reading kind of need a bit of an expectation about what we're taking on. And that's easy for adults because you can read the back page or back of the, you know, cover, or you've read something about it. But for a child, they don't. They've got to trust that the book will be worth it, or they're not going to do it. They're not going to pick it up and they're not going to bother. So you do have to make sure. So having said I don't care about readability, of course I really do care about readability, because children have got to like a book enough to want to read it. But I think you have to be quite wide-ranging in what you think that hook will be. But judging prizes it's so fascinating. It's just really a fascinating, it's not as, I mean, all reviewing is interesting because it really challenges you to think about what the book is and to get beyond the story. Is, you know, what is the book about? Anyone can tell you what the book is about if that's just giving you the plot, but it's what is going on really, and how does the author do that to you?
Yes.
It's so extraordinary. And we all know you have, you know, there are books that you read and you have a completely visceral response to it, and you just think, oh my gosh, you know, when I read, I mean, you know it happened that when I read Madame Doubtfire by Anne Fine a very long time ago. I remember just handing it to my husband and saying, "You must read this," because I just thought it was incredibly funny. That doesn't often, I don't often pass books around to people because I read so many, but just sometimes, and we've all had that experience.
Yes.
You read something and you just can't wait for somebody else to read it.
So do you have any books in particular that you could recommend for teenagers?
Yes, I happen to have done quite a lot of teenage reading for a variety of reasons, and I'm probably, I suppose, because I think I slightly think I'm not so confident about what 7 to 9 year olds read. I think the difficulty about those books, and it's always been a difficulty, there's not much you can say about it, is that they are almost like snacks. I mean, most books for 7 to 9 year olds, you've got to be able, I mean, it's such a gift to be able to write them because they have to be nourishing even in a very short frame. And I think I find them, I find them harder to judge, but I think huge credit to the authors who write them because I think they're very challenging and they look like nothing, but like everything else, things that look small can often be more intense. I mean, picture books are the same, obviously, but they have so much recognition. That's different. But I think that because this is fodder, what children read at 7 to 9 is critical to turn them into. It's also very unlikely to be the book that they wonder about because, unlike me, most of them have learnt to read before they're 7. So it's not it's not the transforming book, but it's got to be something that makes them feel really nourished. And so great credit.
Yeah, it might not be transforming, but it is formative.
Yeah, but I am a huge reader of older stuff, and I never really think of it as teenage. I sort of think of anything as over 12, I suppose. I'm not very good at being sensitive about what children should or shouldn't read because, again, I think they will navigate their way around it. And if it's shocking, well, they're going to be shocked. I mean, so I don't really judge those things. Well, what have I read recently? A book that I absolutely loved, and I laughed so much. It was quite embarrassing. I've been on lockdown for 10 weeks entirely on my own, and I was just laughing my head off on my own in a house, and it just seemed a really weird thing to be doing. It's William Sutcliffe's The Gifted, the Talented and Me. And of course it makes me laugh because the premise of it is that this family, the dad makes money and the family move to Hampstead, and because the mother has dreamed always of living there and has found this wonderful school for the gifted, talented, and the children have to adjust to it. And there's one moment when the 7-year-old says, "Is this what Hampstead looks like?" Because the mother had been raving about it and she's drawn her rainbow with a unicorn on it because that's the phase she's at. It is honestly, I mean, and I live in Hampstead, so it is just very, very funny, but it's also very poignant, and it's about teenagers, and it's about very real teenagers, and it's about fitting in and believing in yourself, and it's about families. And of course, the thing for me that makes children's books so wonderful is that you are constantly living in other families. And
yes, you learn to walk in other people's shoes, don't you?
It's just amazing. And also what I love is seeing the family changing over the years that I've been working in children's literature, that it's changed dramatically as it has in life, but we get to see that. And I think anybody who works in children's literature is so well versed in social needs. Practically nothing comes out, I always think, in the news about what's going on in families that really surprises me because I've read it already.
Yes.
I mean, trans is a really good example of this. There were trans children, or YA books, whatever you call them, doesn't really matter, but in my field, in your field, in our field, there were trans novels long before anyone was talking about trans. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, authors are very, very, very plugged in, and they tend to be very good at writing about things which are appearing to be challenging, and often those things are challenging because society hasn't quite caught up. So a study of the family in children's literature would actually often be predictive of what is going to happen next, rather than reflective. But then, of course, it's also reflective. So I just feel incredibly lucky to be constantly going into other families, seeing how they work, seeing how they don't work. The family is such an interesting construct anyway. And, you know, I come from a big family. I have had a big family, and those interactions, those sibling interactions and the parent-child interactions, and it can be so bad, but it can be so brilliant as well. And I just thought that was a really wonderful book. And I think it's nice because it's, you know, it's got very strong boy characters. And I do think we have an awful lot of YA for girls and not so much for boys. And I think boys need it just as badly.
Absolutely, if not more so.
So that was one I loved. And similarly, again, a very particularly strong male experience was Dean Atter's Black Flamingo, which is just, I mean, it's just mind-blowingly good, which is about a young guy working out his sexuality. But he's just written it, it's completely beautifully written, and it goes into sort of poetic bits, and he changes his voice since he does it. And it's really, you know, I don't really want to say it's about him discovering his sexuality, because that diminishes it almost, that reduces it to just what it's about, but it's how it's written as well. And I think that is it's a debut. And I think is it a debut? No, perhaps it isn't. But anyway, I thought that was completely brilliant. So that goes. And again, I think, you know, it's very nice to be able to see other people's experience and to live for a while in the world of adolescence. And that's what good writers can do. It's funny because people always say, why don't you write a children's book? And I would say, I don't want to, because although I remember my childhood very well, I do not live in the head of an adolescent or a 7-year-old. I just don't. I know I don't. And these good authors do. And they've got that incredible gift to bring that fictionally to all the rest of us. They're very lucky. I
think that young people would recognise that we didn't live in their world and would find it patronising if we were to try and.
Yes, but some people really do. Some people honestly.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, I think the strength of Jackie Wilson, who's one of my all-time favourite authors. Yeah, that's another really good example of the prescience of children's books. Illustrated Mum, published in, I think, 2002. Anyway, a very, very, very long time ago. And what was the mum? Well, she had suffered, you know, she was bipolar, basically. And what was she covered in? Tattoos. What is everybody now? Mental health issues. Yeah. And I mean, and when Jackie wrote that, that was just like a lot of people. I mean, you know, I think it's a completely brilliant and special book. I think all her books are wonderful, and has been such an influence on children's literature. But parents were so resistant because they thought this was just kind of nasty, kind of society they didn't understand. And you think, actually, do you know what? She was absolutely on the button. It was just that it was fairly hidden at that time, and then it sort of became mainstream.
And it was the same with Tracy Beaker.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there are people like her who know what it feels like, but are also able, I think because she's got such a memory of herself as a child, she knows what it feels like to be in any kind of family. And then she is also very good at knowing what a modern family is like. So it's contemporary. Yeah. I think that's an extraordinary gift. And so I just feel, as I say, I just feel very, very lucky to have access to these worlds that I am not in, but I think are so mind-blowing. Another book I've recently read is Meg Rosoff's new novel. And one of the lovely things about having worked in children's books for a very long time is there are some authors who you just can't wait to read the next book. And Meg is one of them, because I remember being given the manuscript of How I Live Now. And just, again, I mean, I think if you asked me to, I'm very faulty on telling the story of I'm not very good at, I never remember the plotty bits, if you see what I mean. Just the mood of that book, I thought so utterly brilliant. And again, the way she wrote it, the sort of power of the storytelling. So I always love reading something new by her, and The Great Garden is her new novel, and it's a new, you know, it's the first one we've had from some time. And so that was a great treat. And similarly, E. Lockhart, who's an American author, who she's just done a new book called Again and Again, and she's a very classy stylist. And it's just wonderful. With an author, you know, there's that I mean, I read loads and loads of authors I don't know because we have a lot of brand new novels. But when it's an author you know, there's that sort of slight comfort of something that's a bit familiar. And then, you know, the surprise, as it were. I think that's just, there's so many different ways of reading, and there's so much that every book gives you.
I think that's why children find series so comforting. They're familiar with it. They know what's going to happen. It's not going to scare them or take them out of their comfort zone at all, and they know that they'll like it.
I think that's fine. I mean, that's a bit like I feel so strongly about rereading. I think you do like things, or that I think it's very naive of us to think that, you know, children will embark on this quite tricky journey sometimes with no pre-knowledge. I mean, you know, if you take an analogy with music, I always like a piece of music better, almost always, the second time I hear it, you know. And I think if I was a child reading it again, I would like a book more the second time I read it, because there's the familiarity, there's looking forward to it.
Absolutely. You know, and there's been a lot of people in lockdown who are reading their childhood favourites. They're going back to these comfort reads. Yeah,
well, I was away with no childhood. Well, I came across How Green Was My Valley, which was a teenage favourite. But I mean, I never mind rereading anything because I don't remember what happened. That's not for me the significant thing. It's the sort of granularity before you get to, you know, that's more important than the actual action. But so those are I mean, so yes, I mean, I've read quite a lot for now. I've also read a wonderful book by someone called Liz Hyder called Bare Mouth, which is a new novel, which is just one of those books that you just sort of think, wow, this is kind of very interesting and very different. And when we talk about things at prize judging, you know, with the judges, it is interesting. Are you looking for something that seems different, or are you looking for something that feels familiar but is written in and is, you know, very well done of its kind? And we've got so many great children's writers. You know, I'm thinking immediately pops into my mind is Geraldine McCaughrean, who I think is a completely exceptional, and I always want to read what she's written next. But you could argue that what she writes is within a tradition that's quite familiar in children's literature.
Yes.
Are we looking, as we move, as we think about the development of children's literature, are we looking at people that build on the great traditions, or are we looking at people who do things slightly differently? That's such an interesting thing to be thinking about. And of course, we want all of it. And that's what's so wonderful in prizes, because you feel it's one of, I hate prizes, except that, I mean, I don't work in general. I'm not a very competitive person, but I do think there's at the moment where there is so little way of a new author getting out there, or of an author with a new book getting out there, prizes do have a very significant role to play.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah,
and I think they change authors' lives, which is nice, but they also change readers' lives because they get particular books into their hands. But it's, you know, the problem of who is successful and who isn't is an enormous, I would hate to have to discuss that, because it's a difficult one. It's not fair. And one of the reasons, you know, I don't read because I have no power to get anything published. So one of the reasons I always say it's no point in me reading your manuscript is because I could think it was very good, but if it doesn't fit on a publisher's list, and I've been a publisher, so I know what that feels like, you know, it's not going to get published. Publishers have very good reasons for publishing what they publish. Probably less good reasons for not publishing things. They know what they need, you know, they need a certain kind of book. And I, you know, sometimes think it'd be nice if publishers did things differently, but that's how the business works, really. It's very, very hard.
So as a publisher, did you used to, I presume you would have hundreds of manuscripts come across your desk. How would you differentiate them? Do you get a feeling reading a manuscript? Just...
Yeah, but often, I mean, I was not a very good publisher. I wasn't a very good publisher because I couldn't do the talk. I couldn't do what you have to do, which is think it's for the, you have, your level of commitment to an author and a book has to be so intense. And I was just not good enough at the bullshitting at the sales conference, basically, when it came down to it. I mean, I would love the ebook. I love editing. I love working with an author. I think it's just such a extraordinary experience talking to authors about why they've done what they've done and thinking about what might be done or whatever. I think it's just a privilege to be in that close to somebody else's creativity. But I just wasn't, I couldn't quite do it. I slipped back to being a critic quite easily because that's where I started. And I find that, I mean, it's not creative in the same way as being an editor is. The feeling that you're making a book is a really wonderful experience for an editor. And you're not making it, but you're helping it,
shaping it
to where it can do. And there are some great editors, children's books editors, who have always have been and still are doing just that. And, it's really thanks to them that we have the quality of writing we do, because they do recognize, yes, they see loads of books, they and the agents see loads of manuscripts and spotting. And again, they're in the same position as you are judging a prize. I'm sure they see some things that seem totally original but don't quite work, or some things that seem totally original and do work, and then some things which you think, but this is just a story we've all read before, but what's so special? That you can't boil it down to a checklist of things that a book has that makes it special. There just is something about it.
Yes.
And what's interesting is finding it being sort of taken up by children.
Given that you've done so many interesting jobs, what's been the highlight of your career so far, do you think?
Oh my gosh, I'd never thought about that. And I think so far is a nice thing, because I'm not sure how much more there is of it. Well, I mean, definitely working at Puffin for Kay Webb was a highlight, because at that point, absolutely, really, there was so little paperback publishing that Puffin was the kind of, everything went through Puffin. Most of that, there was Fontana Line, there was a bit of other paperback publishing, but mostly it came through there. Kay Webb had, she was such a powerful force, and just being in her orbit was unbelievably thrilling.
Must have been a privilege.
Yeah, she was pretty mad. I mean, there was a wonderful moment when I come from a newspaper background, and the one thing I couldn't bear about publishing is that it's so slow that, it can take 6 months before an author hears whether you've read their manuscript and liked it. And I kept saying, why can't we do it quickly? And they said, no, we have to do it slowly. Anyway, there was one time when a book came in and I read it very quickly, and I said to Kay, we won't be wanting to publishing that. She said, darling, you can't write back to them now. They'll not think you've taken it seriously. So then, of course, it sat on my desk for months and months. And then she suddenly said, oh, they're wondering, what's our view on that book? Of course, by then it was impossible to find it. It got somewhere in the office. We had to search high and low and find it. And I thought, why did we not just say after 2 weeks, we've read it, we don't.
Yeah, we like it. Yeah.
It was just so funny, because it was such a sort of typically publishing thing about, but that was incredible. And the Puffin Club was absolutely astonishing, and it was at the height of Roald Dahl, and everything about it was just very, very heady.
That's my era as a child. That's my recollection of reading as a child, being, waiting for the next Roald Dahl to come out. And
yeah, and that's interesting, because we always think that, I do think J.K. Rowling changed children's publishing forever. But I mean, before that, even when my kids were at school, when Matilda came out, everybody had to read Matilda. It was, like wildfire around the classes. So there have been, of course, there are these experiences before. Very little is ever completely new. It's just sort of replicated differently. Gosh, what were the highlights? I've done so many lovely things. I mean, so many things that I've incredibly enjoyed. Everything about working at The Guardian was wonderful. The ambition of The Guardian to have proper children's book reviews was completely incredible. Claire Armistead, the literary editor, was the most imaginative and helpful and supportive person to children's books you could possibly have. The Guardian, committing that amount of space to books was already a risk, and committing the amount they did to children's books on top of it was exceptional. I've loved working for Hay. That's been completely thrilling. It was a whole new area. I don't think I realised. I mean, I'd always done chairing of events, but the responsibility of programming, and again, what children's authors offer, I just find absolutely incredible. You commission somebody to do an event, and then what they give out and the way they've done, and also the cleverness of children's authors in the last 10 years of having changed from, you know, in the early days of festivals, you could sit on a stage and say, I'll tell you a bit about my story and then maybe I'll read you a little chapter, you know, and now they have to absolutely sock it across a room to 500 pupils, and they've turned themselves into live performers. I mean,
they are phenomenal. And it's
extraordinary.
And it's wonderful seeing the reaction of children who speak about authors. Who, you know, we had Tom Palmer come into school and he had a goal post and he had a teacher in the goal and, you know, did this whole interactive quiz, and just the children light up. And for me at school, I didn't think an author was an actual job that I would be able to do, because it could be robot.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think children, you know, I think that's been, I mean, I just feel very, I mean, I don't know why I should feel proud, because they're nothing to do with me, but I just do think it is incredible that that's happened. And I think partly why children's books are so highly thought of, because they have got such a high profile, which comes from this very, very intelligent and hard-working way that the authors are dealing with reaching out to an audience. You know, you're never going to sell a book by just putting it on a bookshelf, or in a library. You've got to actually hand sell it. So no, it's been, I honestly, you know, I don't know why I've always worked in children's books, but well, I do know why I have, but it's such an amazing field. And, you know, I've gone from it being something that was totally hardly ever talked about. You know, if you said you worked in children's books, nobody could think of anything to say to you. And now everybody is writing children's books, and that's fantastic that it's become so. And that's, you know, that's thanks to the high quality of previous writers. I mean, that's thanks very much to the kind of intellectual energy of Philip Pullman that sort of put children's books as being part of a very high level of literature, and to the incredible storytelling gifts of J.K., who's shown us that, you know, you can capture the imagination of the whole world. And I think that's all of that. And also, it's not only the sort of successes of children's books. I also think for authors, one of the things that's changed is that there is so much space in children's books to write the story you want to write. You know, whereas in adult literature, I think it's a little bit more confined to what you can write. And I think in children's literature, you know, if you've got a blank canvas in a way, and if you tell a great story, that's all you need to do, you know.
Oh, well, thank you, Julia. I know that you've got an appointment with the golf course, so I won't keep you waiting.
It's my tennis, actually.
Sorry. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute privilege talking to you this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. If you are watching live, then thank you. If you're watching again, thank you. Come and join my group on Facebook. It's called Bringing Up Book Lovers. It's helping parents to promote a love of reading in their children. And I will put the link to the website that you curate, Love Reading for Kids, in the Facebook page. That's certainly a wealth of information there. So thank you, Julia.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.